Hello, and welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm Luke,
And I'm James.
and this week, with the help of a very special guest, we covered John Carpenter's 1982 sci-fi horror classic, The Thing. Now let's stick a wire in the blood and find out which one of you is a thing.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Yeah, happy Halloween, man.
So, in celebration of Halloween, we watched The Thing, and we actually had our first special guest.
Yeah, we had a nice conversation with Mike Arnzen, horror writer extraordinaire, teacher at Seton Hill University. I don't know about you, but I had a great time talking to him.
Yeah, I was so happy he came on. He was very knowledgeable. He really knew his stuff, and it was just fun to have his energy with us.
Yeah, and that conversation, we had so much fun doing that it went long. And so we were faced with a conundrum, and we decided rather than cut it down and lose a lot of good content, we'd split it into two parts. So this episode's going to contain part one of our conversation with Mike about The Thing, and then we will follow up with a part two that we're hoping to drop on Monday, right before Halloween.
So, before we get into our conversation with Mike, we just wanted to take a second to talk to you about Audible. So, we do have an Audible affiliate link. It's audibletrial.com/ink2film. And with that link, you get yourself a free 30-day trial and one free credit for a novel.
Yeah, and since it's Halloween, I thought we'd talk about a spooky title. That's Max Brooks's World War Z. The reason I bring this up is it's a fantastic audiobook to listen to. So World War Z is, if you, like, say you watched The Walking Dead and you were curious, like, what's going on the rest of the world, not just Atlanta, that's what this book does. It shows you an entire planetary view of what's going on during a zombie apocalypse. And it does it by breaking it into all these little, like, almost short stories. And what's cool about the audiobook is you have a cast of readers, which includes Nathan Fillion, Simon Pegg, Mark Hamill, all these kind of guys. Martin Scorsese are reading sections of this audiobook to you. It's one of the greatest audiobooks I've ever listened to, and it's a good book.
I mean, I love all of those personalities. All of those people are great. I did see the movie, and I read some stuff online about how different the book is and how it's almost unadaptable, like to turn it into a film. Like maybe a TV show would have worked better, but it's like very, very different from the film, right?
Yeah, and I've actually heard rumors that they're maybe going to make a sequel to the movie. Or I'm not really sure what all the details of that are, so could be something we cover in the future. But yeah, the audiobook's great, and it really shows what they can do with this form. It's pretty amazing. That's World War Z by Max Brooks. And if you're going to listen to that, make sure you go to audibletrial.com/ink2film. Get it for free. Get 30 free days. All right, we'd like to welcome Ink to Film's very first special guest host, the man who mentored me during my MFA in writing popular fiction at Seton Hill University, Michael Arnzen. Mike holds, count 'em, 4 Bram Stoker Awards and an International Horror Guild Award for his disturbing and often hilarious fiction, poetry, and literary experiments. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy Halloween.
Yeah, happy Halloween, everybody.
Thanks for coming on. We really appreciate you taking out the time, Mike.
It's my pleasure. This is one of my favorite movies ever made, so I'm eager to talk with you guys about it and hear what you have to say.
So that leads me into our kind of leads me into our first area that I wanted to talk about. It's one of your favorite films. So what are your experience with the film? Did you see it when it was in theaters? Do you own it? Is it something that you watch regularly?
I'm gonna stop you there, James. Before you get into that, I want to hear: did you read Campbell's novella first, or did you see the movie first?
Personally, I did not read it first. I mean, I was to be honest, I saw the movie in the theater because I snuck in. I think I was underage, and I snuck into the R-rated uh, showing of the movie.
Nice.
And I think I might have even done it 2 or 3 times because I loved it so much, and it was just so wild, you know. I never seen a movie like that before, and I, you know, I was a kid in the '70s, and my dad used to always take me to the horror movies with him because my mom wouldn't go. So he was taking me to all these classic R-rated golden age '70s horror films like The Exorcist and things like that, traumatizing the hell out of me. But so you know, when I moved to Colorado later in my life with my mom, I was just like compelled to go see these things wasn't allowed to go see. And I would break into the movies, you know. You know, I'd buy a ticket for a movie over here, and then I'd go over to the John Carpenter movie in the other theater. So to me, right away, it was kind of like seeing something I wasn't supposed to see. So that just added to the whole thing. And ironically, the whole movie's about seeing, isn't it? You know, like you can't believe what you're looking at the whole time.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good intro for what we do on this podcast. We take projects of like book and film combos, and we read the source material first, usually, and then we watch the movie and talk about it. And we just released our novella episode last week, and this is the movie episode now. So for anybody who maybe this is their first episode, that's the kind of thing we do.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, Mike, because I've had so many similar experiences to that as you know, sneaking into a certain movie you weren't necessarily supposed to see. Or, I mean, like you say, I can't even imagine what it would have been like to have seen this for the first time in theaters. Like, I didn't see it till much later, obviously. And like, even so, it holds up in every way. I mean, we just saw it, and that's actually what I should ask you guys. What did you, we all saw it recently. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was. I'm revisiting a movie I saw, I think the first time as a kid as well. Something about this movie, apparently. I think my older brother showed it to me when I was probably like 12. And I remember it was super disturbing and but fun too, you know, and just like the idea of being in this camp in the Arctic, and there was something exciting about that too, adventurous, and at the same time as being terrifying, and that really held up for this viewing for me. Absolutely.
Yeah, I watched it last night too. It's still in my head. The effects stand up, you know. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but even though you know, there's no CGI involved with all that, but the way Mike Bogdan did the effects is just it still stands the test of time, you know. Uh,
Yeah, legendary.
It's unbelievable, man. It's I can't even, looking at what they were able to do, and just thinking that all the man hours that went into it and all the craftsmanship, it's amazing. It's incredible filmmaking.
yeah, and just when you think like, oh, that's a model, suddenly a tentacle will come out of its mouth and it'll drag itself across the room, you know. So it's the way they put them in motion, and so the Carpenter and the effects crew are really working together in sync on this movie in a remarkable way. I think all movie makers want to reach that kind of like, you know, it's just working, you know. It's kind of like a band working together live on stage. It gels, you know. And I
Mm.
think that comes across in this movie. It makes it a really strong movie. The other thing that I kind of was thinking about afterwards was just the pacing of it. You know, a lot of that's the editing, but there's a lot of running around and you know quick pans where you see another character running, and you know it just starts right from the beginning, chasing that dog with the helicopter. It's just always in motion, and then it'll slow down and stop, and then you know you start to get paranoid at those moments. So it's really pressing the thriller buttons. You know, the suspense
Yeah.
is really well done. Even though I've seen it a million times now, I still was like in it, you know?
That was one of the things I mentioned in our novella episode, where I said I thought that was something I found was lacking a little bit in that novella. It seemed to be more interested in the bizarre science it was proposing and the nature of this creature, and less interested in creating dread and suspense. And that's where this movie comes in spades and turns that up to 11. And I think it really benefits from that.
Oh yeah, I could totally see that. I mean, Campbell's more of a science fiction writer, you know, and
Right.
you could tell he gets fixated on the technology. I mean, even the dialogue is kind of you know weird.
Yeah, it is.
The best part of that novella for me is like just the description of the sounds the thing makes, you know.
Yeah.
But plot wise, it feels almost too long, doesn't it?
Yeah, it feels a little. Yeah, I agree with that.
Whereas
um,
I wish the movie version of the thing was longer, you know.
yeah, I agree. Actually, I do agree. But we should talk about that at the end, and maybe in particular spots where we found that maybe it did feel a little rushed. Speaking of the classic nature of this, you teach a course about horror movies in particular, or you're going to be teaching a course. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I haven't taught this horror film class since I was back at the University of Oregon, so I'm really excited to do it again. Where I teach at Seton Hill University, we don't really have a film program, so we fit it in our English major whenever we can. And it just so happens everything came together, and I'm going to be running a horror film class in the spring term. So if any students are listening to this, please sign up. I want you in there. Uh,
I would love to take that course. So
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of in a similar situation. The University of Florida didn't have like a specific film program, but I was able to craft my own with like a film and media studies minor and production major. So we had a lot of those things going on, but those classes were, I mean, vital in helping me understand film in different ways and really teaching me like the different aspects that you don't really get unless you take those classes. So I highly recommend it to anybody who's listening. Take that class.
yeah, I mean, Arnzen was my mentor when I was at getting my MFA, and I was able to take a bunch of modules with you. And I can definitely recommend any class you can take with him. Sign up for it right now. He's a fantastic teacher.
Thank you. Yeah, I just get excited about sharing things, and talking about the things I'm reading usually in an English class. But with film, like you can learn from it live right there just by like deconstructing a scene or freezing pausing the image and just picking
Mm.
apart the mise en scène or whatever. And it's just really it's live teaching in a way that is unlike anything else. And I think that might have been part of what James was speaking to. It's like you're seeing it for yourself and you're talking about what you see with other people live. And I mean, I guess that's part of what you guys are doing with the podcast, right?
It is. I think that, yeah, if you like that kind of stuff, I think this is a podcast for you. Speaking of breaking down scenes, this movie starts off with a flying saucer crashing into the earth. I had completely forgotten that scene.
It's so good
Right.
too. Honestly, one of the best title cards that in my memory. It's such a
Oh
good title
yeah,
card. Right after
I
the
posted it
flying
to
saucer
Instagram.
falls in.
Yeah, it's great. I actually watched the special features on the Blu-ray where the guy who made
Mm.
the title cards explains how he did it. I can't recount exactly what his methods are, but it's all, analog. He like cut out the letters, then he put a space behind it where he used a black plastic bag that he draped behind the lettering, and then behind that was some, like a black or blue screen, and then he set fire to the plastic bag so that, and then there was smoke in front of it too, so that the light of the flames comes through the lettering and kind of gets cast in that spooky mist that's in front of it. And that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really cool.
That's like the kind of inventiveness and craftsmanship that like films during this era had, and sometimes I worry that certain films are losing that. I mean, there are films today that are holding up to that standard, but some just like the because everything you can do it in a computer now, some people are falling away from that, and that it feels so real when somebody puts that amount of craftsmanship into a title card, where they had to do it all like you said, analog and practical.
It seems like there's been a kind of a renaissance in the physical prop department. Like it's been coming back, and I think filmmakers who use CGI as like a tool in the tool belt rather than the only tool are going to benefit from that.
Yeah,
Definitely.
totally. I think some of it's due to just production companies and studios and whatnot, or just be independent filmmakers feeling the financial pressure and the time pressure. And so they kind of just opt for what's quick and easy.
Mm,
But there's a whole art to the whole digital side too that shouldn't be,
sure.
cast aside. It's good. It's still in development, I think.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of the Tarantino and Rodriguez movie.
Grindhouse.
Yeah, Grindhouse. Sorry. Um,
Yep.
they put so many digital effects into that movie to make it look like, you
Yeah.
took sandpaper to it and shit. And like, they could have done that for real and probably saved themselves time and money, but they were playing with that technology. And I mean, that movie, maybe it doesn't always, seem as fake as a lot of the other CGI shortcut
Yeah.
moves that.
Yeah, Mad Max Fury Road is a really good example of that recently, where everything was actually done, and most of the CGI was like making the backgrounds look amazing and like adding color, and So like there are ways to use it that can augment the thing that you're showing on screen that actually has a presence to it. But I think we're getting in the weeds a little bit. Let's get back to our movie. We come in and we got a helicopter chasing a dog, right? Now, as a dog lover, this always got me. Like I always like even now knowing that the dog that is being chased is a monster, I still am like rooting for this dog, and I'm like I don't know. It's a really interesting way to play with the emotions there, because if you're seeing it for the first time, you don't know that. You're like, what are these people doing?
Yeah, it's funny because I was going to mention this. John Carpenter was somehow able to make me fear a lovable looking dog, and just the dog acting in this film is on another level.
Yeah.
I mean, just by sitting still and moving slowly and staring at things, I was, you get a little creeped out by that dog, and I don't know who to thank for that, but that person, whoever trained that dog, did a great job, because that was all, that they had to train the dog to do that stuff, and it all was like really creepy and real.
Yeah, there's a scene where the helicopter gets really close to that dog, or at least it looks like it does, and that's all real. So that was pretty amazing.
Well, that's true. Yeah. And I with that scene, I remember just one brief moment where the dog kind of stops in its tracks and turns and looks back at the helicopter. And that moment shows intentionality, like it's aware that it's being chased as opposed to just running away from gunfire.
There seems to be a lot of that too, where it's like the dog is waiting when they're coming back. I'm getting ahead of myself, but the dog is waiting and looking out the window when certain characters are coming back from locations and things like that. Like it's got a certain
I think they kind of
to
turn
it.
the knob up on it over time, right? Like they start to add more and more of scenes of the dog doing something that's unusual for a dog to do. But yeah, that is the first hint of it.
I think anytime Carpenter cuts to a shot where you just see the dog, we're asked to think, what is that dog thinking? What is its motive, right? And it's all reaction shots, really. So it's interestingly constructed to give that the thing a characterization in the dog before we even have met the thing. So it's so smartly done.
So going off the dog for a second, when we first meet McReady, he's playing chess with a computer, and he pours himself a glass of Jim Beam, and then he's playing chess, and then he pours the new glass into the computer, destroying it. And I was like, "Oh my god, so many bad things are happening right now."
I mean, it's like, did he really think that nobody else would want to play at some point on this like deserted like base that they're all trapped on? You don't think anybody else is going to want to play chess in a little bit? He was that angry that he had to pour down his Jim Beam.
I mean, it's a character moment, I guess, really, right?
It totally is. Like he's the rebel, right? And
yeah.
He's drinking like a Western star kind of thing, but he's also rebellious against technology, and it does build his character. But maybe the themes of the movie are right there too. Playing chess with this alien that you don't know what is what, and also I would add with the audience. I think the film is constantly playing chess with the audience, and we're trying to outsmart Carpenter and crew the whole time, and then at the end it's a stalemate, right? So I think spoiler? Sorry.
No, that's all right. Full spoilers for the movie, in case you didn't get that.
It's been out for 30 years, 35 years.
35, yeah.
Well, yeah, a lot is happening there in that moment, and it's kind of the physical against the the technological or the scientific.
And he's refusing to play the game, right? Like he's essentially flipping the table on the game.
Yeah, right.
Which he kind of does later with some of what he gets into at the end there.
So basically, this helicopter that's chasing this dog through the snow ends up at this U.S. base, and they're shooting at the dog and throwing grenades down, which I thought was really reckless, especially near a base. And eventually, they land, and because of the explosions, all of the crew from this U.S. Science Institute run out, and the dog comes up and starts licking this one guy in the face, and the people who were chasing him down get out and start walking over with a gun, and then they start shooting at them, the people they assume, and somebody gets shot. I think it's George. George gets shot, and he goes down, so everybody starts running away, and the dog starts running towards the building. The commander kind of is like waiting in the wings. He's up in the building, and as this guy gets closer, he's speaking another language, so they can't understand what he's saying. And I actually looked it up, and he was saying, like, in Norwegian. I'm assuming he was saying like for Norwegian audiences, they were watching and they knew exactly what was going on because he was speaking legitimate Norwegian and saying like, "Stay away from the dog. He killed my whole crew. We gotta you can't let him into your facility."
Really?
He pushes up towards the base. Isn't that crazy? Like that's
cool.
It seems like it would ruin the movie a little bit. Like the suspense is lost. Like, oh, that's exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
But
He chose not to use subtitles at that moment.
yeah, exactly.
Smart.
And if you're one of the people who gets that, you just get like a cool moment of knowing something that you know that the characters on screen don't know.
So from the building out the window, the commander Gary shoots this combatant in the head, and he goes down. And we have a situation where everybody's trying to figure out why these people were. They actually find out from the side of the helicopter that they're Norwegian and why they would be in their area and why they were chased. They don't even necessarily realize that the dog was being chased.
Yeah, there's a moment when they first get off the helicopter. There's like a slapstick comedy moment where he goes to throw the grenade and he like releases it and it flies backward into the snow and he has this moment of like, oh no, and then he runs away and then the other guy tries to dig after it. And I remember seeing that moment and like it was kind of funny, but like it felt a little odd, like tonally for the movie. And this made me think of like some of Carpenter's movies I don't like as much. And I feel like this is the kind of stuff he gets into a little bit more, where it ruins the movie a little bit for me when you start getting this kind of like silliness going on. And I'm glad that there's not a ton of that in this movie.
Right. Yeah, it goes against the survivalist kind of mood, you know.
Well, and it's not serious, right? Like it's like a silly moment in an otherwise serious film.
Yeah. But there has to be human weakness and, frailty in
Yeah.
here to the point where
Sure.
we are stupid. We do destroy each other. It's just like war is being commented on in this scene too, right? Like there's even you cut ahead to a couple scenes and, one person says, well, maybe we're at war with Norway, who knows? They're so isolated.
Right.
But that is what we're seeing is this inability to communicate is what leads to violence. And, that's a theme of the movie, I think. The whole
Sure.
role of interpersonal communication as a means towards survival, as a means towards peace, and also as we get frustrated with the fact that we can't really communicate with other species, let alone each other. So that's played out there in microcosm, right? It's like the fear of the strange Norwegian army coming to get you when really it's trying to protect you.
Yeah.
The men go back into the building, and George is being stitched up, and they're all trying to figure out why the Norwegians were there. And we find out that the U.S. station has lost communication with all of their contacts. Anybody they try to reach out to is unavailable, or they can't reach them. But they're looking through notes or something, or some sort of information that they had, and they knew that the Norway crew had 10 men, and obviously those two we just saw die. So they think there's 8 more, and they're about an hour away from where they're at. So they decide they want to go check out what's going on at this other base. And McCready is the pilot, who is our main character, Kurt Russell's character, and Dr. Copper. They go off to investigate. And at this point, the crew have just been letting the dog hang out with them in the rec room and everywhere that they are. It's just kind of laying around and doing whatever it feels like. This is a moment where I would be disappointed if I didn't mention something that I thought was amazing in this movie, was Kurt Russell's, McCready's sense of style. His hat, his sunglasses. It's the coolest looking hat I've ever seen. It's unique. I mean, have you ever seen a hat like that before? Because I gotta get one.
It looks like Pharrell Williams' hat or whatever, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, he looks like I don't know, a Mexican cowboy or something, right? Like it's almost like he should be wearing a poncho.
No, that when you said that about him being a rebel and kind of a Western sense, that really fits with his what he's wearing here, right?
Yeah.
Now I wanted to say there was a scene as they leave where the camera is looking at them sitting at a ping pong table, I think, and it starts to pan down slowly to the dog. And as it pans down slowly to the dog, the score comes in with its like boom 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 boom, and so it's playing a game with you in a really cool way because you start to. This is my first time where I don't know, I love dogs so much, I wasn't willing to think something was weird with the dog until this moment, because this moment it's like saying there's something creepy about this dog, but as soon as it does that, it then also cuts away to them, I think, flying in the helicopter to the new place. And so it's kind of playing a game with you, like you almost doubt yourself. You're like, oh, maybe that music was just for the next scene, and they just started it early. And so you're not 100% sure that they're saying this dog is creepy, or at least I wasn't.
Yeah, and I mean, you bring up the score. Ennio Morricone is a legend, and for him to have done this horror film when he's so well known for these spaghetti westerns, he just brings such gravitas to this score. And I mean, it kind of not to take anything away from it, but it kind of reminds me of like that Jaws, the idea that it's like the simple noises that are like strong and play, like you're saying, it adds tension immediately to any situation. But I just thought he did a great job. It's tense, and he's fantastic.
Yeah, totally. I was just going to say that too. Like he worked in the Western, right? So it fits with this American frontier kind of theme that's being played out there, and especially with McCready, he's like half Clint Eastwood, half John Wayne, but also like a hippie in a way too. So it's really an interesting kind of characterization there. But the music is very low. I think that's what I was thinking about the score when I watched it last time. It's just all these low notes, and it kind of pulls you down and keeps the gravitas, as you said. Uh, it's like things rumble under the surface. The subwoofer is challenged by this movie, and I think that says something about the kind of, you feel like the muffling of your ears when you're in snow and things like that. There aren't a lot of like high notes like you get in Psycho or something like that. It's all low, 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 and it keeps your heart beating too.
Yeah, uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, sure,
And ominous. Yeah. So I was going to ask you guys, actually, speaking of Kurt Russell's character, what do you think that Carpenter was trying to do with these characters? Because they seem to be like fairly typical archetypes. Like Kurt Russell's character is kind of that like drunk rebel, like cowboy type character. What do you think that Carpenter was trying to do with that? Like, what was he trying to articulate with making? Do you think he was just using archetypes, or do you think he was trying to say something with? Because I felt like, other than the fact that he was a rebel, him being kind of an alcoholic was kind of just a character trait.
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, I do think I think that McCready is the character we want to identify with most as the protagonist, right? So a lot of his actions kind of are things that a lot of people I think can identify with. It's kind of petty rebellion kind of things, and yet he's a leader. He knows his stuff. He's really the only person who can pilot the helicopter, and we get little short scenes with him kind of talking about the kind of technical aspects of his job with authority, like, oh, the wind's picking up in 2 hours, Doc. You think I should do that? That kind of thing. And he also connects most closely with the Wilford Brimley doctor, just like the doc in a Western village or something, and so he's given like a lot of smarts despite his, streak his of rebellion. I think all the trust gets instilled in him. So like later in the movie, and I know this is a scene you might have planned to talk about. Well, I remember when they don't trust Gary anymore, and they're like, who's going to be the leader? And somehow McCready ends up with it, because the people that want it too quickly are like, no, we can't trust you. We want someone with an even temper or something.
Yeah, Childs in that scene, Childs reaches for it. Yeah, Childs reaches for it, and McCready's like, nope. So we have to somebody more trustworthy than you.
And they always have guns on each other too, which is another Western kind of standoff kind of approach to this movie. It's interesting.
It made me think of what's that new Stranger Things. So the character Hopper, he is that archetype, like machismo officer who his life's a mess and he's an alcoholic and he smokes and like all this stuff, right? He's a character who's based off of this kind of archetype from the 80s that was so popular. And I can look for like a going back to the source, this is the kind of character that Hopper is in that show.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't watched Stranger Things, unfortunately. My Netflix ran out, but
You should.
I know. But I did want to say that a lot of people look back at a lot of film critics look back at 80s cinema and talk about the Rambo kind of character and what it says about masculinity in that decade. And I mean, McCready falls right into that, and you can't watch this movie and not realize it's an all-male cast, and it's very much about men.
Yeah.
And I don't know the extent to which Carpenter's directly trying to play with that theme, but looking back now, I mean, you can totally see. So
Sure.
when James asked the question about the whole cast of characters, there are archetypes, but maybe there are archetypes of masculinity or male identity or something like that that reflect their era. Um, Again, food for thought. I don't really have any claims to make about it. I just think it's
Yeah.
present and something, you know.
It almost seems like a war movie in some senses too, right? Like it almost seems like they're a unit, and with their commander and their doctor, and like they all have like some sort of, and it's actually kind of ambiguous too whether or not there's military stuff going on. To me, it was, at least, because they do seem to be working for the U.S. government in some way. So yeah, it almost seems like an army movie in that sense to me.
Yeah, they're a research team, but they're
Right.
government sponsored. So, ideologically, they are an arm of the government.
Sure.
You know.
So the next thing that I wanted to ask you guys about was with the dog sneaking around and kind of just being around in the camp in the base. There were a couple times where things happen and we weren't necessarily supposed to know, especially upon like first couple viewings, who exactly who certain characters were supposed to be in those moments. But there's a moment early on when the dog is walking the halls on its own, and it walks into a room, and you can see the shadow of a figure on the wall. And when the dog
Mhm.
walks in, the shadow reacts. And I was just wondering if you guys thought that was supposed to be a specific person, if you thought you had puzzled it out and figured out who it was, or do you think it was just the fact that it was supposed to be like somebody is a thing at this point because the dog got in there when that person was alone, and it's kind of just setting us up to be like not sure about which characters are and which characters aren't.
I think it's a specific person. I don't know that we're supposed to know who it is in that moment, because it's very hard to tell. But I have a theory about a character who is revealed later to be a thing, and I think this is the moment he becomes one.
I'm not. I don't think we're worried about spoilers, right? Do you want to just say who you think it is, or
So yeah, I think it's Palmer there, who later gets revealed to be a thing, because otherwise I don't know when he becomes one. I think this is his moment.
yeah, I can see that because he's like the one who's like fully formed into a thing, and has been kind of lurking around. And once we find out in that interrogation scene, he's the one who's like made it this far, and then is revealed by the blood. The first one who's revealed by the blood.
I have a lot to say about that scene, so let's save that scene for when it happens.
I think one of the things about that moment is it clearly puts it in the genre of mystery. It's like the shadow
Mm,
knows kind of shot, and it gets us wondering what's going on there between man and animal at that precise moment. Uh, and that it basically signals that Carpenter is going to hold back information. You're not going to get direct depiction of things for the rest of the movie. You have to question what you're seeing from that moment forward if you haven't gotten it already with the music on the dog and so forth. Uh, and it adds the mystery component to it. And this movie is so paranoid. I mean,
yeah.
everything is, the characters are paranoid, but Carpenter's trying to make us paranoid, and I
Mm.
love that. And that's the first moment where that really kicks in, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this makes me kind of wish I'd seen this for the first time as an adult in a weird way, because I think kid me maybe didn't pick up on all this stuff, but you don't know. Like something happens in that scene, but then when we return later, that guy like nothing seems to have happened, and so then you're left questioning like, wait, what could have happened there? And I think kid me just blows it off and says, "Oh, I'll find out eventually." Whereas adult me would be more like, my mind would be racing, trying to figure out what could have happened.
Yeah, I think it also does lead. It does make us question Clark, who the crew really questions Clark early on in the movie,
Yeah.
because he's so close to the dogs. He's always there, And I thought it was Clark the first time, you know,
Mm,
because the face looked, the shadow's face looked a little bit like Clark's to me,
yeah.
but ultimately Clark wasn't. you know,
Yeah.
uh, what a movie.
I feel like Campbell was doing a lot with that. Like he especially using the source material because we know from the novel that Gary ended up being one, and in this situation we find out that Gary makes it through well, as far as he doesn't become a thing till he does, I guess, kind of. So McCready and Dr. Copper make it to the Norwegian camp and they start searching around. They find holes in the walls, a bloody axe through a door, and a trail of blood leading to a man sitting in a chair with his wrists and throat cut.
I mean, I have a lot to say about this scene. I think you can look at this as a blueprint for what is going to happen to their camp. Almost everything here happens to them. The whole camp is on fire, has been burned down. This is what happens in their camp. There's a fire axe like stuck in a door. Like this, that is a scene that happens later. They're running around with fire axes. Clearly, these guys have been like shooting each other and not trusting each other. And I don't know. Like there's just violence everywhere. There's signs of violence. They find the creature mass of bodies, whatever it is, that's been burned outdoors, right? Which is something they do themselves and try and do. So I thought it was really cool because he almost puts it all on the table right there, and he says this is what's about to happen to them, and so I thought it was fun in that way. And the other thing I thought of is that with that big block of ice, that's directly from the novella, right? So though we don't get the ice block in this movie like directly, we get it indirectly, almost like this camp is in a way kind of what happened more in the novella. I don't know.
I felt the same way. McCready and Dr. Copper are going through this camp, and they find documents and tapes, and the doctor starts collecting them, and McCready keeps foraging on, and eventually he finds this hollowed out block of ice that you were talking about. And as they're like walking out, they find the charred remains of some sort of creature, and they decide to take it back, which probably wasn't the best decision. But I mean, somebody had to deal with this creature eventually, because we come to find out that it's still alive, or there's cells that are still alive in it.
Yeah, and I want to let Mike talk here in a second, but it is the same as the body that's found in the block of ice in the novella. That becomes the body that's found at the camp for them. It's the same. It serves the same function.
This movie is really interesting to me that it has this early scene, like you said. The camp is devastated, and as Luke's words, a blueprint for what might happen to the camp for the main storyline. A lot of horror stories use this, where even if it's just like a serial killer story, you'll see somebody killed early in the book or in the movie brutally, and that keeps you paranoid for the remainder, because it could happen again and it might get worse. So it's a classic structure of horror right there. The other part of that is that, like, the block of ice is symbolic to me of the past. The past has been excavated here, and if you just think about this movie in terms of all the other past texts that led up to it, right? So, like, it's not only a novella. I mean, there's the Howard Hawks 1950 whatever 52 version of the movie, The Thing from Another World, and Carpenter has to make a movie that will entertain people who are familiar with both those preceding texts. And to me, that's like metaphorically a little bit of what's happening here. As a remake, it's staging its anxiety about past texts haunting the present, and and then it becomes a shapeshifter story, right? So, like, this is a shape-shifting text, and that's why we could have a prequel in 2011, and games and adaptations, and I mean, it's going to live forever because it's one of these texts that has this kind of iconic structure and an open-ended world behind what we're given here. This is just a snippet of the alien's existence, really, that we get to see as it struggles to survive. So I don't know. I just think, like, there's something about this story, this premise, that's malleable and in itself a shape-shifting text. And that's part of what's happening here on a very subtle level, I know. But I'm really fascinated by the way remakes and films like that kind of deal with the past.
Yeah, and I mean, you bring up the fact that this is a remake, and I would pose that this is I think it's my favorite remake of all time. I can't think of one that was remade that I enjoy as much as I enjoy this one. It's better. I mean, I've seen the 51 film, and this is just better in every way, in my opinion. There's so much to be said for that film, especially during the era that it came out, but this is just like so much of what I personally enjoy in a film. So they bring the creature into the camp, and it has like two faces, and they're kind of looking at it, and it's all deformed and mutated looking. And Gary, the commander, tells Blair, the doctor, kind of to start an autopsy, or I guess he's more of a scientist than a doctor. And Blair finds that the creature has the same internal organs as a normal human. And during that kind of autopsy period, the rest of the men are in the rec room, and George is bit under the table by the dog, which and then George is like, "We put this dog up, and why is it even out here still?" Which is a good question.
Wait. You said he was bit?
Yeah, I think so.
I didn't think he was bit. I thought he was just startled by him. Like he was sitting there, and then the dog ran under the table, and he just kind of went like, "Ugh." Like I thought he was just startled. Maybe it doesn't matter, but
Well, that's a good question. I never even thought of it because I mean I've seen it so many times. I just always assumed he was bit there. But you might be right because later on it doesn't really. If he was already bit and like infected or something,
I would
it
think
make
they'd be
sense.
more paranoid about him being infected or something, right?
Yeah.
If he had been bit.
So George asks Clark to put the dog away. So Clark takes the dog in, puts it with all the other dogs. And this is what I was talking about with the dog acting. The dog goes in and stares at the wall and just lays there, head up,
yeah.
while the other dogs are all
So
laying down on
weird.
their side. So weird. And then we get some of the best practical effects.
Yeah, before we get to the practical effects, as someone who has dogs and knows dogs, like those are all really well trained because they introduce a new dog into a pen that there's like 5 dogs laying down in. The dogs don't react at all. They all just lay there looking at it, and like that's such a hard thing to do. These dogs have to be so well trained. It was amazing to me that they could all just sit there and act like no big deal, and almost on command start to get freaked out.
I love that scene too. I mean, it really, that's where the movie starts to go over the top, and which I love about this movie. It
Yeah.
just goes places no movie goes. Uh, but, or a couple things, right? So, like, symbolically, okay, these animals trapped in a cage. That's exactly what the camp is. So
Oh yeah.
it's another little microcosm of the story. That's just like it's setting up another blueprint for us to think about people tearing each other up to survive. The thing about that scene that sticks with me most, though, is where the dogs are literally pulling the chain link off with their
Yeah.
jaws. Let me out of here, kind of thing. I don't know how realistic that is, but it might be go back to that humorous side, Luke, that you were talking about before. I thought it
I
was
don't know.
funny. I laughed when I.
I did not find it
I
funny. I
felt bad,
thought that
yeah.
absolutely could happen. Yeah.
Well, I have a dark sense of humor, but it seemed preposterous that they'd literally use their teeth to get out. Unless it pulled away the first time, then they do it, right? Like I can see a dog trying that, but it's almost like methodical the way that dog is picking apart the chain link, and I don't buy it.
I don't know. I mean, I bought it. Especially if like it was damaged there in some way. I mean, animals will gnaw their own legs off to get free of traps and stuff. So it could be that kind of thing. It's really showing the desperation of these animals in this moment, and that to me it hit home. Like I believed it.
Yeah, so basically what happens is the dog is just laying there and then it starts kind of vibrating and growling, and then it splits open and starts shooting out tentacles and spraying stuff on the dogs,
Face
and
peels back off
Yeah.
of its skull.
there's like muscle and flesh and blood everywhere, and it starts to get just so grotesque, and as it's kind of
Spider legs shoot out of the sides of it.
Yeah.
I have to point out these things. It's so cool.
Yeah, and what's crazy to me is that like somebody thought of that and then they implemented it into some sort of rig that would it's amazing. And so Clark overhears the commotion and goes back to check out what's going on, and some of the dogs kind of run out, and he's able to shut the creature in there, and McCready from across the way hears the commotion and pulls the fire alarm and then runs over.
So there's also like 1,000 little like tentacly things that shoot out of it everywhere and start like wrapping up the dogs and stuff. And there's a sound, and I don't know if you guys can identify what the sound is that they play, but it sounds very much like insects or something to me. Like there's a certain sound they play that's very unsettling, and it's when these like all these little tentacles are in the air.
Like a hissing, like you're saying, like insect
Yeah.
hissing, like all these noises, and that's another thing. The sound design of these, like to have created these noises, I'm sure they're blending like like elephants and cows
Sure.
and like all these different animals to make these noises. But I mean,
Yeah.
it came out really well.
Yeah, it's just so over the top. The sound makes it, it makes it believable, and yet so unbelievable. You know, uh, that's these creatures, every time you see the thing in transition, it's like a werewolf
Yeah.
story. The cool part of a werewolf movie is whenever the guy turns into a werewolf, the display of the hair growing on skin. Here it's the same sort of thing, but I think Carpenter's going way out of his way to make it unlike a werewolf movie, so that, like, I mean, a dog turning into this spider-headed Venus flytrap bodied thing. It's indescribable. It's Lovecraftian,
Hmm.
like in Lovecraft stories, the prose goes crazy and over the top in an attempt to represent the unrepresentable alien species. And in here, we get like the costuming and the special effects, and everything's constructing this weirdness that has a slight believability in terms of its organic use value. Like it needs to crawl away, so it spits out these arms. And later in the story, it's logically explained that the alien must have visited all these planets and absorbed all these different species. So that's what's going on here. Is it's just this mix of different genetic compounds, and it can summon them at will, and yet it's so chaotic. So I guess without that survival need to get the hell out of the cage, it panics. And so it's just really interesting to
Yeah.
think about, how logical is this? How is it just out to be gross? I don't think so. Every little piece has a meaningfulness to it. And
I like that. I mean, and with all the meaning it has, it still is gross. Like it still is like, to me it was like, so this scene I think is being intercut with them doing the autopsy, right? Like they're kind of happening at the same time, and until they get called over, there's a little bit of overlap. I think one leads into the other, and the autopsy scene, we didn't even really talk about it, is really disgusting. And it's so good though, and it's this, like, I call it body horror, in that it's like, this is us, this is a regular body, however you can look at it and see how freakish and monstrous it's become. And that immediately is unsettling, because I don't know, it's just like, we all know our own bodies, and we can recognize that something is so horribly wrong with the body on the table. I don't know, is that uncanny, Mike? Is that would you call it that, or is that something different?
well, hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we project our own kind of body anxieties into these body horror films. I think some people are squeamish about one body part, others are squeamish about another. The film theorists who talk about body horror, look at it as like desires that we have. So like often these gross out bodies in monster movies might have sexual qualities through a lens darkly, so that it might look like a phallic symbol, or, a woman's body parts or something.
Mm.
And that somehow the mix of that with the disgusting quality makes us really disturbed on a deep level psychologically. Like we want to see it, but we want to look away, that kind of thing. And that's the theory, the psychoanalytic theory behind this stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's just the body in extremis, and it's an alien body that's partly our body. So really, what Carpenter's kind of doing is alienating ourselves from our own bodies. Um, and the power of the creature is that it can become us, right? So it has more control over its body than we do, except when it's between bodies.
Hmm.
And he's also setting up the dog scene, right? Because we see this monstrosity, and clearly something is horribly wrong with it. And then now, when the dog goes through its transformation, we can see that this is clearly what was happening with this other thing. Like, this is all the same thing. I don't know. So narratively, I think it also serves a purpose in that way, right?
Is that the autopsy scene where a head goes up on a stalk?
Not yet.
Not
No,
yet, yeah.
that's a second autopsy scene that happens later. That's
They all
amazing.
blur together.
Yeah. Well, and this also sets the table for that, because this is a safe autopsy relatively. It's gross, but nothing actually happens to the person doing the autopsy. So maybe a false sense of security is set up here for when we get to the second autopsy later.
Mike, you brought up the Lovecraftian nature of the things that are going on here, and I actually read something online that was talking about this was like the beginning of Carpenter's his trilogy of Lovecraftian like ideals, I guess, in his films. Have you seen the film Prince of Darkness?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also the film In the Mouth of Madness.
That one totally.
Yeah. So these,
Uh,
I was reading online that the theory is that like he was approaching these, it like I guess in this film tentatively, and then further in the next couple of films that he like developed as passion projects, and kind of leaned into that Lovecraftian nature of characters or scenarios, and like kind of the big thinking of what was going on in those films. They're not connected, but at the same time they're spiritually connected.
right. I think the other two movies you mentioned are more about like the cult side of like the Cthulhu cult, and uh, how man will kind of subordinate itself to a higher power even when it's evil. But with this movie, it's the monsters. It's just fascinated by the monstrosity of it all, and the cosmic horror. I mean, this one is directly. That's why we get the spaceship in the opening credit. We
Definitely.
have to be told this is a space creature from another planet, and it's not from the core of the Earth or something like that.
Right.
So I mean, and you know, I'm curious if you guys like, when did Campbell write Who Goes There? Was that in the 50s?
1938.
Wow. Okay, so he must have read Lovecraft, or at least thought about these kind of issues too, and maybe ported it into a more sciency realm, if you know what I mean. Because I don't see how any writer in the 20s and 30s could not have read weird tales and written science fiction, fantasy, or horror. I just can't imagine it, because that was one of their markets, if anything, right?
Hmm.
So I don't know. It's interesting to think about. Is there a Lovecraftian influence in Campbell's novella? I can't answer that question, but maybe.
So yeah, these dogs are being attacked by the thing in the cage, and it feels like it's starting to, I guess, be attacked because all the men are running up and seeing what's going on, and they're flashing flashlights at it. So it does this thing
Sure
where it like
does.
splits in two, right? Like the arms reach up into the ceiling and like pull up a
Yeah.
piece of the creature up into the ceiling. And around that time, Child shows up with a flamethrower. And although they had been shooting the creature, it didn't seem to have the effect that they wanted it to. So they torched it with the flamethrower, and that seemed to do the trick for now.
Yeah, I don't know that. Does anyone even see that happen? Because no one remarks on the fact that like part of this creature went up into the roof. So it seems to be that no one saw it. But I the whole time was sitting there going, because okay, we can. I want to hear your guys' theories about where this thing goes eventually. But to my knowledge, we don't see that thing again until maybe later in the movie.
I think it has to be the kind of end game. That's kind of what we see at the end. Like, although,
Okay, you
yeah,
think that's what I thought too.
that's what I think.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw that movie when I was a kid in the theater. I was like, did I miss something? How is all this underground tunnel being built in this? Remember, spoiler again, right at the end.
Yeah.
But there's this underground network that ostensibly the thing has been building the whole time. So it must be that escaped fugitive early version. Uh, but it's implied that it's like Blair who went under the floorboards of his little prison cell.
Yeah, that's the. I definitely want to talk about that at the end because I was a little confused about how that all goes down.
Just very briefly in this scene, that we're talking about, flames are used really in a dominant way. It's like I think Luke was saying, it's the way that they put it down, right?
Right.
And there's so much fire in this movie. It's like it's always a primitive thing, right? Fire, and fire and dynamite are the only kind of things that can combat the alien in this movie. They can't outwit each other. They have to resort to caveman kind of ways to survive. And I mean that's clearly Carpenter making a comment here about survival, and maybe if we go back to the war concept, that we become beasts to survive.
That's a departure from the novella as well because in the novella, the thing that they consistently use is like a pair of wires that electrocutes.
Oh.
They keep coming up with this little. Isn't
It's
that right, James?
yeah,
They
like
come
a
up with
cable. They got some sort of like helicopter or something rig cable.
Yeah, and they use it to like electrify the thing and it like turns it into like a rubber or something. And so that's interesting that that's almost a reversal because that's almost technology being used against it in a sci-fi story, whereas this is a horror story and it's more primitive than that.
Totally.
So after they torch it, Blair ends up doing an autopsy on this as well, and I think this is what you guys were talking about, where he's pulling it apart and there's like a there's like a face within it. Like he pulls back the flesh and he's like really grossed out by it, but there's like some sort of like face, and this is when he realizes like this is kind of dog-like, this is not, and he's like this is obviously imitation, and this is when they realize that like it's becoming something that it wasn't at first, and fully trying to imitate this dog. And he talks about
autopsy scene I had forgotten about.
Yeah, well, I think what the scene that you guys are talking about isn't necessarily an autopsy, but what it is when they're giving CPR to one of the characters.
Oh yeah, that's the final one.
The men start watching these tapes that Dr. Copper had brought back, and they're seeing like this crazy dig site that the Norwegians were digging in, and MacReady decides that they need to visit the site where the Norwegians had been spending most of their time. So they hop in the helicopter, they fly over there, and they find the spaceship that had been crashed and the guy theorizes that based on the ice that it's been there for 100,000 years, and nearby they find this dug up section of ice where they think that the creature was launched out of the ship and froze there in that spot until he was dug up by the Norwegians.
It's interesting because in the novella it was 20 million years. So this is a big reduction, and I'm just curious. Do you think there's any reason? Did you think maybe Carpenter thought 100,000 was more believable?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think 20 million is like, for it to have been frozen there. I guess just thinking of like the Earth heating and cooling, and I don't know. That's just who knows. That's
maybe
just me
it's improbable.
spitballing.
That's true. Yeah, I don't know.
No comment.
So when they get back, they're relaying all this information of the spaceship and everything that they found to the rest of the crew. And the cook Knowles brings this torn up, raggedy looking garment of some kind, and he says like somebody threw it out in the trash, and it's just a throwaway thing at first, but it'll be a clue later on, obviously. Blair starts running these computer simulations, and he finds it, which is very interesting because this must be a very powerful computer for 1982. He's running simulations of I guess whether or not something could assimilate and completely clone something else, and then also he runs the percentage on whether or not any of the crew members are already a thing, and then also he finds out that it would only take 27,000 hours to fully assimilate the whole world, which I did the math, and it equates to like 3 years.
Huh.
Yeah. So it says 75% likely.
I love
very
that scene.
even number.
To me, that scene is so kind of wonky because, like, what algorithm did he use to determine 75%? And it really depends on or in the 1980s kind of culture, faith in computers being able to do anything. It's really silly. And at the same time, they show him holding a pencil. He's drinking Jim Beam or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very like he's old school scientist, but he's doing this strange math with this computer, which doesn't really hold up now. You look at those screens and it dates it immediately. That's always the problem with using computers in the films, I think, is it immediately dates the film.
The cell assimilation that's going on looks like the game Asteroid. Like that, I always think of that. It looks like except for it's absorbing, but it looks kind of like the game Asteroid.
Yeah. It's so slow moving.
Mm-hmm.
It does build up the tension. Like, what can this cell really do? But it might as well be drawing stick figures. It's so silly.
Speaking of the longevity of this franchise, I would want to see a movie about those 3 years. Because if this thing gets out and it's going to take 3 years to take over the world, why not? Let's make that into a movie, right? Let's see what this looks like in the, you know what I mean? Because obviously it would have to be a big budget movie, but let's bring this thing out into a city and see what happens.
Brilliant! Give this man $1 million. Make that movie. I would love to see that. Brilliant idea.
All right, that's going to be it for part 1 of our talk with Mike Arnzen. In part 2, coming to you Monday, we get into the infamous Wire in the Blood scene.
Yeah, I'm really happy with how that came out too. We touched on a lot of the stuff that I thought was really important.
Yeah, make sure you check that out. We wanted to let you know that if you would like to connect with Mike Arnzen, you can go to follow him on Twitter at Mike Arnzen, and that's ARNZEN. And his website is gorlitz.com, Gorelets. And if you would like to read any of his books, you can find them on Amazon or other online retailers.
Yeah, and if you wanted to connect to us, Ink to Film, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all at Ink to Film, and also our website, inktofilm.com.
Yeah, and the best way to support this podcast is to subscribe and leave us a review on whatever platform you use to listen. A review like this one from CC Gator on iTunes. A great podcast that has a specific goal of analyzing books and their film adaptations. This podcast has inspired me to pick up the book, go see the movie, and listen along.
That's awesome. Thanks, CC Gator. We wanted to go ahead and announce our next project is going to be Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones.
I'm super excited about it. The anime by Hayao Miyazaki is one of my favorites. We'll be covering that after we finish reading the book.
Yeah, anything Hayao Miyazaki does, I love. So I'm really excited to jump into that. I've never read the novel. I don't think you have either, right?
Nope. All new.
So yeah, it'll be cool to see where that world came from. So if you wanted to get ahead of the game and leave us feedback, you can actually send us an email at inktofilm@gmail.com and send us ideas for future projects or your take on the film or novel, Howl's Moving Castle.
Yeah, and if it has like a deep personal connection with you, something like that, let us know. We also wanted to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music, and we wanted to thank Audible. If you wanted to get a free title, you can go to audibletrial.com/inktofilm, get 30 free days, get a free credit, maybe go ahead and get that book by Diana Wynne Jones. All right, we'll see you for part 2. I'm Luke.
And I'm James.